That's what frontier towns do. They look away. They let the law decide who lives and who gets buried in an unmarked grave. But when those federal marshals dragged her toward the door, calling her a criminal, a murderer, a liar, one man broke the silence. A blacksmith who never spoke. A man the town feared more than trusted. He said two words that stopped everything. She's mine. One lie, 1 second, and suddenly the whole town was watching to see who would bleed first. Stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button. Let's go. The town of Ashford Bend didn't have a name worth remembering until the day blood hit its floorboards. It was one of those settlements that grew too fast, fed by railroad promises and land grabs, swelling with people who had nowhere else to go. The buildings leaned like tired men. The streets turned to black mud when it rained, and it rained often. There was a general store, a saloon that doubled as a courthouse when needed, a livery stable, and a few scattered shacks that pretended to be homes. Everything smelled like wet wood and horse manure. And at the edge of it all, past the last crooked fence post, sat a forge that billowed smoke day and night. That forge belonged to Rowan Hale. Rowan didn't talk much. Didn't need to. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, with hands scarred from years of shaping iron. His hair was dark, cut short, and his jaw carried a few days of stubble that never quite became a beard. His eyes were gray, not the soft kind, but the color of winter sky before a storm. People in town said he could fix anything made of metal, but nobody knew much else about him. He'd shown up 3 years ago with a wagon full of tools and a look that said he wasn't interested in friends. He didn't drink at the saloon, didn't gamble, didn't attend the Sunday gatherings where the preacher tried to wrestle salvation out of sinners. He worked. That was it. Hammering, heating, bending steel into shape. The rhythm of his hammer was the only conversation he offered. Some folks thought he was running from something. Others thought he was just mean. Either way, they kept their distance. But on that particular Thursday afternoon, distance wasn't going to be enough. The general store was packed. It usually was on Thursdays. Supply wagons came in, and people showed up to buy flour, nails, tobacco, whatever they could afford. The air inside was thick with the smell of dried meat and kerosene. Voices overlapped in a low hum. A woman argued with the clerk over the price of salt. A kid kicked at a barrel near the door. 2 men leaned against the counter, swapping lies about a cattle drive. Nobody noticed the woman at first. She came in from the side entrance, the one that faced the alley. Her steps were uneven, like she was drunk or hurt. Her dress, once maybe blue, now streaked with dirt and something darker, clung to her frame. Her hair, tangled and wild, hung over her face. She had one hand pressed against her side, and when she pulled it away, her palm was red. The kid saw her first. He stopped kicking the barrel and stared. Then the woman's knees buckled and she hit the floor hard. The store went silent. "Help!" she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please, somebody, help me." Nobody moved. The clerk, a thin man named Moss with spectacles that sat crooked on his nose, leaned over the counter and squinted at her like she was a stray dog that wandered in. "Miss, you hurt?" She nodded, gasping. "They're coming. They'll kill me if you don't." "Who's coming?" Moss asked, but his tone said he didn't really want to know. The woman tried to push herself up, failed, and collapsed again. Blood smeared across the floorboards. A woman near the back of the store clutched her child and stepped away. The 2 men at the counter exchanged a look, then turned their attention to the door. Because that's when the marshals arrived. There were 3 of them. The first one through the door was a man named Creel. He was stocky, with a thick mustache and a badge pinned to his vest that caught the light. His boots were dusty, his coat stained from days on the trail. He had a revolver on his hip and a rifle slung across his back. His eyes swept the room, cold and efficient, until they landed on the woman. "There she is," he said. The other 2 marshals followed him in. One was younger, lean and twitchy, with a face that looked like it had never needed a razor. The other was older, gray-haired, with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. All 3 wore badges. All 3 were armed. Creel stepped forward, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice loud enough to fill the store. "You're under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy against the United States government." The woman, Elara, shook her head weakly. That's not It's not true. You're also wanted for the murder of a federal clerk in Ridgefield, Creel continued, ignoring her. You've got the right to come quietly, but I don't much care if you don't. Alara's breath hitched. She looked around the store, her eyes wild, searching for something, someone who might step in. But every face turned away. The clerk busied himself with a ledger. The woman with the child backed toward the far wall. The two men at the counter suddenly found the floor very interesting. Please, Alara said, her voice breaking. I'm not. Creel grabbed her by the arm and hauled her up. She cried out, clutching her side where the blood had soaked through. He didn't care. He yanked her toward the door, and the younger marshal moved to grab her other arm. And that's when the door opened again. Rowan Hale stepped inside. He wasn't a man who drew attention by trying. He just filled space in a way that made people notice. His shirt was stained with soot, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms ridged with muscle and old burn scars. He carried a hammer in one hand, not because he planned to use it, but because he'd been working when he heard the commotion and hadn't bothered to set it down. He stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the scene. The marshals. The woman. The blood. Step aside, Creel said. His tone was flat, the kind of voice that expected obedience. Rowan didn't move. Creel's eyes narrowed. I said step aside. Rowan's gaze shifted to Alara. She was barely standing, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Her eyes met his for a second, just a second, and he saw something there. Not guilt, not deception, terror. Rowan looked back at Creel. She hurt? Not your concern, Creel said. Move. Looks like she's bleeding, Rowan said. She resisted arrest, the younger marshal cut in. Shot at us. Got what she deserved. Rowan's jaw tightened. She got a trial. Creel's hand moved to his revolver. She'll get one. In Ridgefield. Now move or I'll move you. The store was dead silent. Everyone watched, waiting. Rowan set the hammer down on a nearby barrel, slowly, deliberately. Then he straightened and looked Creel in the eye. She's my wife, he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Creel blinked. What? My wife, Rowan repeated. His voice didn't waver. Alara Hale. We got married 2 months ago. You're arresting my wife. Alara stared at him, her mouth half open, too stunned to speak. Creel's face darkened. That's a damn lie. Check the records if you want, Rowan said. Ashford Bend, Justice of the Peace, signed it himself. There's no justice of the peace in this. There was, Rowan interrupted. Old man named Pharaoh died 3 weeks ago. Records are in his house if you care to dig through them. Creel's grip on Alara tightened. I don't give a damn if you married her yesterday. She's wanted by federal law. Then you'll need a warrant that says Alara Hale, Rowan said, not Alara Vance. The older marshal stepped forward. It's the same woman. Prove it, Rowan said. Creel's face flushed red. You're obstructing federal officers. I'm protecting my wife, Rowan said. That's my right. Not when she's a criminal. You got proof of that? Creel's hand moved to his gun, but the older marshal put a hand on his shoulder. Easy, the older man said quietly. Then he looked at Rowan. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Rowan said, but she's still my wife. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension in the room was a living thing, coiled and ready to snap. Then Creel shoved Alara toward Rowan. She stumbled, and Rowan caught her before she hit the floor. She was shaking, her weight heavy against him. This isn't over, Creel said. His voice was low, dangerous. We'll be back, with proper documentation, and when we come back, you're both going to regret this. He turned and walked out, the other two marshals following. The door slammed shut behind them. The store erupted in whispers. Rowan ignored them. He looked down at Alara, who was staring up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded, but when she tried to take a step, her legs buckled. Rowan caught her again, steadying her. Come on, he said. Let's get you out of here. He half carried her toward the door. The crowd parted without a word. Nobody tried to stop them. Nobody offered to help. By the time they stepped outside, the marshals were already mounting their horses. Creel turned in the saddle and pointed at Rowan. You just made yourself an enemy, he said. Rowan didn't answer. He just kept walking, Alara leaning heavily against him. The forge was a quarter mile from the center of town. tucked away where the road turned to dirt and the trees started to thicken. It was a simple structure, 4 walls, a roof, and a stone hearth that glowed red even in daylight. Tools hung from the rafters. An anvil sat in the center, scarred and blackened from years of use. The air smelled like coal and hot metal. Rowan brought Alara inside and set her down on a wooden bench near the back wall. She winced, pressing a hand to her side. Blood seeped through her fingers. "Let me see," Rowan said. She hesitated, then slowly lifted her hand. The wound was a jagged tear along her ribs, not deep enough to be fatal, but bad enough to need attention. Rowan grabbed a cloth from a nearby shelf and pressed it against the wound. She hissed in pain, but didn't pull away. "Bullet?" he asked. "Grazed," she said through gritted teeth. I didn't shoot at them. I swear. I ran, and they just started firing." Rowan didn't respond. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best he could with water from a bucket. His hands were steady, practiced. He'd done this before. "You need a doctor," he said. "No," she said sharply. "No doctor. They'll report me." "They might save your life." "They'll turn me in." Her voice cracked. "Everyone will." Rowan tied the cloth around her ribs, tight enough to hold, but not so tight she couldn't breathe. Then he sat back and looked at her. "Why'd they come after you?" he asked. Alara closed her eyes. "Because I found something I wasn't supposed to find." "And what was that?" She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "The truth." For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the hearth and the distant clang of a hammer from somewhere in town. Alara sat with her back against the wall, her breathing shallow but steady. Rowan stood near the anvil, arms crossed, watching her. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. Her voice was soft, almost cautious. "Back there, you didn't have to lie for me." "Didn't lie," Rowan said. She frowned. "You said I was your wife." "I did." "But I'm not." "Not yet," Rowan said. "But you are now." Alara stared at him. "What?" Rowan walked over to a shelf and pulled down a battered tin box. He opened it and rummaged through the contents. Old papers, a few coins, a pocket watch that didn't work. After a moment, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her. She unfolded it carefully. It was a marriage certificate. Blank, except for a signature at the bottom. "Pharaoh gave it to me a year ago," Rowan said. "Said if I ever decided to settle down, I'd need one. Never used it." "This is insane," Alara said. "Probably," Rowan agreed. "But it'll buy you time." "Time for what?" "To figure out what you're going to do next." Alara looked down at the certificate, then back up at him. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Rowan turned back to the anvil and picked up a piece of iron, testing its weight in his hand. "I know enough," he said. "You know nothing," she said, her voice rising. "You don't know what I did. You don't know what they're accusing me of. For all you know, I could be—" "A murderer?" Rowan finished. He set the iron down and looked at her. "Are you?" She hesitated. "No?" "Then that's all I need to know." Alara shook her head. "That's not how this works. They have warrants, witnesses, evidence. They'll come back, and when they do, they'll have to prove you're the same person," Rowan said. "And if you're my wife, legally bound under a different name, that complicates things." "Not for long." "Long enough." Alara's hands trembled as she folded the certificate and set it on the bench beside her. "You're risking everything for a stranger." "Maybe," Rowan said, "but I've seen what happens when people turn their backs. I've seen what men like Creel do when nobody stands in their way." He paused. "I'm not turning my back." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe, or regret. But all she saw was resolve. "What's your real name?" she asked quietly. Rowan didn't answer right away. He turned back to the fire, watching the flames dance against the stone. "Doesn't matter," he said finally. "It does to me." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to be your fake wife," she said, a faint bitter smile tugging at her lips, "I should at least know who I'm pretending to be married to." Rowan almost smiled. Almost. "Rowan," he said. "Rowan Hale." "And before that?" His expression darkened. "Before that doesn't exist anymore." Alara nodded slowly. She understood that. The need to bury a past so deep it couldn't claw its way back up. My real name is Alara Vance, she said, but you already knew that. I did. My uncle is Victor Halcrest, she continued. He's a land commissioner, works for the territorial government, controls property deeds, sales, transfers, everything that has to do with who owns what. Rowan's jaw tightened. He'd heard the name before. Everyone had. Victor Halcrest was one of those men who wore power like a second skin, the kind who could smile at you while signing your death warrant. And? Rowan prompted. And he's been stealing land for years, Alara said, falsifying records, forging signatures, taking property from settlers who can't read the documents they're signing. He partners with federal officials, judges, clerks, marshals, and they split the profits. How do you know? Because I worked for him, she said bitterly. I kept his books, filed his paperwork. I thought I was helping people secure their land. But then I started noticing discrepancies, names that didn't match, deeds that disappeared, families who lost everything and didn't even know why. She paused, her voice trembling. So I started digging. I found proof, documents, ledgers, enough to bury him. And he found out, Rowan said. She nodded. I tried to take it to the territorial governor, but Victor got there first. He spun a story, said I was the one stealing, that I'd killed a clerk who discovered my fraud, that I was dangerous. Her voice broke. And they believed him. Why wouldn't they? He's a respected man. I'm just nobody. Rowan watched her, his expression unreadable. Where's the proof now? I hid it, she said. Before I ran. It's safe. But it won't matter if I'm dead. It'll matter, Rowan said. How? Because we're going to make sure people hear it. Alara laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You think anyone's going to listen? They didn't listen in the store. They'll never listen to me. They'll listen if we make them, Rowan said. He picked up his hammer, turning it over in his hands. Your uncle built his power on silence, on people being too afraid to speak up. We take away the silence. We take away his power. And how do you propose we do that? Rowan set the hammer down and looked at her. We find the people he hurt. We get them to talk. And we make sure their voices are louder than his lies. Alara stared at him. That's suicide. Maybe, Rowan said, but it's better than running. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was insane, that this plan would get them both killed. But the truth was, she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of letting fear decide her life. Why are you doing this? She asked again, softer this time. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I know what it's like to be the one everyone turns their back on. And I'm done pretending I don't see it when it happens to someone else. Alara's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Rest, Rowan said. You're safe here, for now. She wanted to believe him, but safety felt like a word from another life. Well, night fell over Ashford Bend like a heavy curtain. The town settled into its usual rhythm, lamps flickering in windows, the saloon humming with low voices and the occasional burst of laughter, the distant bark of a dog. In the forge, Alara lay on a makeshift bed Rowan had set up in the corner, a blanket spread over a pile of hay. It wasn't comfortable, but it was warm. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers, casting the room in a dull orange glow. Rowan sat near the anvil, sharpening a blade. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone filled the silence. Do you ever sleep? Alara asked. Not much, Rowan said without looking up. Why not? Old habit. She shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. You were a lawman, weren't you? Rowan's hand paused for just a second, then he continued sharpening. What makes you say that? The way you handled Creel, she said. The way you knew exactly what to say to stall him. You've done this before. Rowan didn't answer. I'm right, aren't I? She pressed. He set the blade down and finally looked at her. Yeah, I was. Long time ago. What happened? Same thing that always happens, Rowan said. I trusted the wrong people, made the wrong call. And when everything fell apart, I was the one left holding the blame. So you ran. So I started over, Rowan corrected. There's a difference. Alara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry. For what? For dragging you back into this. Rowan picked up the blade again. You didn't drag me anywhere. I walked in on my own. Still, she said, I know what it's like to want to leave something behind. And here I am, forcing you to face it again. You're not forcing me to do anything, Rowan said. I made a choice. I'll live with it. Alara watched him in the dim light. There was something solid about him, something immovable, like the anvil he worked at, scarred and worn, but still standing. Thank you, she said quietly. Rowan didn't respond. He just kept sharpening the blade, the sound a steady, grounding rhythm in the darkness. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the walls of the forge. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, and far beyond the edge of town, 3 marshals sat around a campfire plotting their next move. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Morning came too fast. Alara woke to the sound of hammering, steady, relentless, the kind of noise that worked its way into your skull and refused to leave. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. The wound in her side pulled tight, and she had to bite down on her lip to keep from crying out. Rowan was already at work, his back to her, shoulders moving in rhythm with the hammer. Sparks flew from the anvil, scattering like tiny stars before dying on the dirt floor. She watched him for a moment, this stranger who had stepped between her and certain death without hesitation. He moved with the kind of precision that came from years of repetition, each strike deliberate, controlled. There was something almost meditative about it. You're awake, Rowan said without turning around. How did you know? Your breathing changed. He set the hammer down and reached for a pair of tongs, lifting a piece of glowing metal from the forge. How's the wound? Hurts, she admitted. Good. Means it's healing. Alara pushed herself to her feet, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her ribs. She made her way to the workbench and leaned against it, watching as Rowan plunged the metal into a bucket of water. Steam hissed up in a violent cloud. What are you making? She asked. Hinges, Rowan said, for the Miller place. They need a new barn door. You're working? People still need things fixed, Rowan said. War or no war, life keeps moving. Alara frowned. This isn't a war, isn't it? Rowan pulled the metal out of the water and examined it, turning it over in his hands. You're hiding from men with guns who want you dead. I'm harboring a fugitive. Seems like war to me. She didn't have an argument for that. Rowan set the hinge aside and wiped his hands on a rag. We need to talk about what happens next. I know, Alara said quietly. They'll be back, Creel and his men. Maybe not today, but soon. And when they come, they'll have more than just a warrant. They'll have questions. They'll dig into our story, poke holes in it until it falls apart. So what do we do? Rowan crossed his arms and leaned against the anvil. We do what I said last night. We go on the offensive, find the people your uncle hurt and get them to talk. Alara shook her head. You don't understand. These people, they're terrified. Victor doesn't just steal land, he destroys lives, he ruins families, and anyone who tries to stand up to him ends up buried or broken. They won't talk, not to me, not to anyone. Then we make them see that staying silent is worse than speaking up, Rowan said. And how do you propose we do that? By showing them they are not alone. Rowan straightened and walked to a shelf near the back wall. He pulled down a rolled-up map and spread it across the workbench. It was old, the edges frayed, the paper stained with soot and grease. Lines crisscrossed the surface, marking territories, settlements, parcels of land. Where did you get this? Alara asked. Bought it off a surveyor a few years back, Rowan said. Figured it might come in handy someday. He pointed to a cluster of marks near the eastern edge of the map. These are the properties your uncle targeted, or at least the ones I know about. Alara leaned in, her eyes scanning the marks. How do you know which ones? I pay attention, Rowan said. People talk. They complain. They mention losing land, signing papers they didn't understand, deals that went bad. I listen. He tapped one of the marks. This one here, Garrett family, lost their farm 2 years ago. Thought they were signing a loan agreement. Turned out it was a deed transfer. Alara's stomach twisted. She remembered that name. She'd filed the paperwork herself, never questioning it, never thinking to look deeper. And this one, Rowan continued, pointing to another mark. Widow named Clara Finch. Victor convinced her to sell her land for half what it was worth. told her the railroad was coming through and the property would be worthless. The railroad never came. I remember her, Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She came to the office once, begged my uncle to give her land back. He had her thrown out. She's still around, Rowan said, lives in a shack about 10 miles south of here. Works as a washerwoman now. Alara looked up at him. You've been keeping track. Like I said, I pay attention. She studied the map, her mind racing. There were dozens of marks, dozens of families, dozens of lives shattered by a man she'd once trusted, once loved as family. Even if we find them, she said slowly, even if they agree to talk, what then? Victor has judges in his pocket, marshals, clerks. The entire system is rigged in his favor. Their testimony won't mean anything. Not if it's just testimony, Rowan agreed, but if we can tie it to the documents you hid, the proof you already have, then it becomes something else. It becomes undeniable. Alara's breath caught. The documents are hidden in Ridgefield. That's 2 days' ride from here, and the marshals are watching the roads. Then we don't take the roads, Rowan said. She stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. Alara turned away, pressing a hand to her forehead. This was insane. All of it. She should be running, putting as much distance between herself and Victor as possible. But Rowan was right about one thing. Running wouldn't stop Victor. It would just delay the inevitable. If we do this, she said finally, if we actually try to fight back, people are going to get hurt. You understand that, right? Victor doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. Anyone who helps us will become a target. I know, Rowan said. And you're still willing to risk it? Rowan met her gaze, his gray eyes steady. I've been hiding for 3 years, keeping my head down, pretending the past doesn't exist. And where has it gotten me? I'm still looking over my shoulder, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. He paused. Maybe it's time I stopped running too. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was throwing his life away for a fight that wasn't his. But the truth was, she needed him. She couldn't do this alone. All right, she said. Where do we start? Rowan rolled up the map and handed it to her. With Clara Finch, she's the closest. And if anyone's angry enough to talk, it's her. They left the forge just after noon, taking a narrow trail that cut through the woods and skirted the main road. Rowan rode a sturdy bay mare and Alara sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling. Every jolt sent a spike of pain through her side, but she gritted her teeth and held on. The forest was thick here, the trees old and gnarled, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. Birds called from somewhere high above, their voices sharp and insistent. Rowan didn't talk much as they rode. He kept his eyes on the trail, his body tense, alert. Alara wondered what he was thinking, if he regretted this already. If he was calculating the odds of survival and finding them wanting. After an hour, the trees began to thin, and the trail opened up into a clearing. In the center of the clearing sat a shack, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. The wood was rotting, the windows covered with strips of cloth instead of glass. A thin line of smoke rose from a crooked chimney. Rowan dismounted and helped Alara down. She stumbled, her legs stiff from the ride, and he caught her elbow to steady her. Stay close, he said quietly, and let me do the talking. They approached the shack slowly. Before they reached the door, it swung open and a woman stepped out. She was small, thin to the point of frailty, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. Her dress was patched in a dozen places, and her hands were red and raw from years of hard labor. But her eyes, sharp, dark, unforgiving, held a strength that belied her fragile frame. Rowan Hale, she said, her voice rough as sandpaper. Didn't expect to see you out here. Mrs. Finch, Rowan said, inclining his head. Hope we're not intruding. Depends on what you want. Her gaze shifted to Alara and her expression hardened. And who's this? This is Alara, Rowan said. My wife. Claire's eyes narrowed. Your wife? Since when do you have a wife? Recent development, Rowan said evenly. Clara looked Alara up and down, taking in the stained dress, the pale face, the way she held her side. She looks like trouble. She is, Rowan admitted, but the good kind. Clara snorted. There's no such thing as good trouble. She stepped aside and gestured toward the shack. Come in then, but don't expect hospitality. I don't have much to offer. The inside of the shack was as bare as the outside. A single room with a cot in one corner, a small stove in another, and a table that looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it too hard. The smell of lye soap hung in the air. Clara poured them each a cup of water from a cracked pitcher and sat down on the edge of the cot. "So," she said, fixing Rowan with a hard stare, "what is it you want?" Rowan glanced at Alara, then back at Clara. "We need to ask you about Victor Halcrest." The name landed like a stone. Clara's face went still, her hands tightening around the cup. "That bastard," she said quietly. "What about him?" "We're gathering evidence," Alara said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her gut. "Proof of what he's done. The land he's stolen, the people he's hurt. We're trying to bring him down." Clara laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Good luck with that. Men like Victor don't fall. They just keep climbing, stepping on whoever's beneath them." "Not if we expose him," Rowan said. "And how do you plan to do that?" Clara demanded. "He owns half the judges in the territory. The other half are too scared to cross him. Who's going to listen to you? Who's going to care?" "People will care if they see the full picture," Alara said, "if they understand the scope of what he's done. But we need witnesses. People who are willing to stand up and say what happened to them." Clara set her cup down and shook her head. "You're asking me to paint a target on my back. I've got nothing left to lose, but that doesn't mean I'm eager to die." "We're not asking you to die," Rowan said. "We're asking you to tell the truth. The truth doesn't protect you from bullets," Clara shot back. "No," Rowan agreed, "but silence doesn't either." Clara was quiet for a long time. She stared at the wall, her jaw tight, her hands trembling slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost resigned. "He took everything," she said. "My husband and I worked that land for 30 years, built a life there, raised our children, and Victor came in with his smooth words and his legal documents, and he convinced us to sign it away, said it was for our own good, said we'd be better off." She paused, her voice breaking. "My husband died 6 months later." "Heartbreak," the doctor said. "But I know the truth. It was shame that he let someone take what we'd built, that he failed to protect it." Alara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." Clara looked at her, her eyes wet but her expression fierce. "Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't give me my land. So why should I help you?" "Because if you don't," Alara said, "he'll keep doing this. To other families. Other people who don't know what they're signing. And eventually, there won't be anyone left who remembers what it was like before Victor Halcrest decided he owned the world." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked away, blinking hard. "What do you need from me?" she asked finally. "Your testimony," Alara said. "A written statement about what happened. Dates, details, anything you remember. And if it comes to it, we may need you to say it in front of others." "In front of a court?" "Maybe," Rowan said. "Or in front of the people of Ashford Bend. Wherever it'll do the most good." Clara laughed again, but this time there was no bitterness in it, just exhaustion. "You're both out of your minds." "Probably," Rowan said. Clara stood and walked to a small trunk in the corner. She opened it and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "This is the deed," she said, handing it to Alara. "The one Victor made us sign. I kept it. Don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd need it someday. Maybe I just couldn't let it go." Alara unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was neat, official. But as she read it, her stomach sank. The terms were buried in legal jargon designed to confuse, and at the bottom, in small print, was a clause that transferred ownership outright. Not a loan, not a lease, a complete and permanent transfer. "This is criminal," Alara murmured. "Tell me something I don't know," Clara said. Alara looked up at her. "Can I keep this?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps put that man in the ground, you can have it." "Thank you," Alara said. Clara waved her off. "Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead of you, and Victor's not going to go down easy." "We know," Rowan said. Clara walked them to the door. As they were leaving, she called out, "Rowan!" He turned. "You be careful," she said. Both of you. Victor's got a long reach, and he doesn't forgive." "Neither do I," Rowan said. They visited 3 more families over the next 2 days. Each one told a similar story: deception, manipulation, loss. Each one handed over documents, letters, scraps of proof that Victor Hailcrest had built his empire on the backs of people who trusted him. By the time they returned to the forge, Alara had a satchel full of evidence. It wasn't everything she needed, but it was a start. Rowan built up the fire and heated water for coffee. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of what they were doing settling over them like a heavy blanket. "Do you think it'll be enough?" Alara asked finally. Rowan stared into the fire. "I don't know, but it's more than we had 2 days ago." Alara pulled the documents from the satchel and spread them across the workbench. Deeds, contracts, letters, a paper trail of corruption stretching back years. "We still need the ledgers," she said, "the ones I hid in Ridgefield. Without those, all we have is testimony, and testimony can be dismissed." "Then we'll get them," Rowan said. "How? The marshals are watching the roads. Victor probably has men posted in Ridgefield by now. We won't make it 10 miles before someone spots us." "We don't go directly," Rowan said. "We take the old mining trails, through the mountains. It'll take longer, but it's safer." Alara shook her head. "You don't have to do this. You've already done more than—" "Stop," Rowan interrupted. He set his coffee down and looked at her. "I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing it because it's right, and because I'm tired of watching people like Victor win." Alara met his gaze, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. "All right," she said. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow night," Rowan said. "We'll need supplies, food, water, blankets, and we'll need to move fast." Alara nodded. "I'll be ready." But as she lay down that night, staring up at the rafters, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Victor wouldn't sit idle. The marshals wouldn't give up. And sooner or later, the fragile lie they'd built was going to shatter. She just hoped they'd be ready when it did. The next morning, Rowan went into town to buy supplies. He told Alara to stay hidden, to keep the fire low and the doors locked. She agreed, though the confinement made her restless. She spent the morning organizing the documents, cross-referencing names and dates, trying to piece together the full scope of Victor's operation. The more she read, the angrier she became. This wasn't just theft. It was systematic destruction. Victor had targeted the vulnerable, widows, immigrants, families who couldn't afford lawyers. He'd used the law as a weapon, turning it against the very people it was supposed to protect. By midday, she was so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear the footsteps outside until it was too late. The door swung open and 2 men stepped inside. One was Creel. The other was the older marshal, the one with the scar. Alara's heart stopped. Creel smiled, slow and cold. "Well, well, Mrs. Hale. Funny running into you here." Alara didn't move. Her mind raced, calculating distances, exits, options. There were none. "Where's your husband?" Creel asked, his hand resting on his revolver. "Out," Alara said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Out where?" "I don't know. He doesn't tell me everything." Creel's smile widened. "That's a shame, because we've got some questions for him. About you. About this convenient little marriage." He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the forge. "Funny thing, we talked to a few folks in town. Asked about Rowan Hale. Know what they said?" Alara didn't answer. "They said he keeps to himself, doesn't socialize, never mentioned a wife." Creel's gaze locked onto hers. In fact, nobody even knew he was married until he said it in that store. Strange, don't you think? "People mind their own business here," Alara said. "Or," Creel said, leaning in, "he lied, and you're not his wife at all. You're just a fugitive he's hiding." The older marshal spoke for the first time. "We checked the records. There's no marriage certificate on file in Ashford Bend. No justice of the peace named Pharaoh." Alara's stomach dropped. "So here's what's going to happen," Creel said. "You're going to come with us, quietly, and when Rowan gets back, we'll have a nice long talk with him about obstruction of justice." "I'm not going anywhere," Alara said. Creel's expression darkened. That wasn't a request. He reached for her arm, and Alara moved without thinking. She grabbed a hammer from the workbench and swung it hard. Creel jerked back, and the hammer missed his face by inches. "You little—" Creel drew his revolver. The older marshal grabbed his arm. "Don't. Not here. She just tried to kill me. And if you shoot her, we'll have half the town asking questions. We do this quiet." Creel glared at Alara, then holstered his gun. "Fine. We'll do it your way." But she's coming with us. Now. They moved toward her and Alara backed up, her mind screaming for a way out. But there was nowhere to go. And then the door opened again. Rowan stepped inside, carrying a sack of supplies. He took in the scene, Alara backed against the wall, the marshals closing in, and his expression went cold. "Step away from her," he said quietly. Creel turned, his hand moving to his gun. "This doesn't concern you anymore, Hale. She's coming with us." "Like hell she is." Creel drew his revolver and Rowan moved faster than Alara thought possible. He dropped the sack and lunged forward, grabbing Creel's wrist and twisting hard. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullet buried itself in the dirt floor. The older marshal drew his own weapon, but Rowan slammed Creel into him, and both men went down in a tangle of limbs. "Run!" Rowan shouted. Alara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the satchel and bolted for the door. Behind her she heard the sound of fists hitting flesh, the crash of metal, Creel's furious cursing. But she didn't look back. She ran into the woods, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her side screaming in protest. She didn't stop until the forge was out of sight, and the only sound was the pounding of her own heart. And somewhere behind her, Rowan Hale fought alone. Alara crouched behind a fallen log, her lungs burning, her hand shaking so badly she could barely grip the satchel. The woods were dense here, the undergrowth thick enough to hide her, but not thick enough to make her feel safe. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves made her flinch. She pressed her palm against the wound in her side. It was bleeding again, soaking through the makeshift bandage. She'd pushed too hard, run too fast, but she couldn't think about that now. All she could think about was Rowan. She'd left him behind, alone, fighting two armed marshals while she ran like a coward. Her throat tightened, but she forced the guilt down. He'd told her to run. He'd made the choice, and if she went back now, she'd only make things worse. She waited, listening. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the hammering of her own heartbeat. Minutes passed. Then she heard it, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming closer. Alara pressed herself flat against the log, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped. "I know you're out here." Creel's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You can't hide forever." Alara closed her eyes, willing herself to disappear. "Your husband put up a good fight," Creel continued, his tone almost conversational. "But he's done now, bleeding out on his own floor, and you're next." Alara's chest constricted. "Bleeding out? No, he couldn't be—" "Come on out, Alara," Creel called. "Make this easy on yourself. I promise it'll be quick." She didn't move, didn't breathe. The footsteps started again, moving away from her position. Creel was searching, but he didn't know exactly where she was. Not yet. Alara waited until the sound faded, then slowly lifted her head. The forest was empty, no sign of Creel or the other marshal. She had to move, had to get back to the forge, had to know if Rowan was— She forced herself to stand, biting down on the scream that threatened to escape as pain lanced through her side. She couldn't stay here, and she couldn't leave without knowing. She moved through the trees, keeping low, every sense on high alert. The forge was only a quarter-mile away, but it felt like miles. When she finally reached the edge of the clearing, she stopped and peered through the branches. The door to the forge was open. Smoke still rose from the chimney, but there was no movement, no sound. Alara's heart sank. She stepped out of the trees, moving slowly, her eyes scanning for any sign of the marshals. Nothing. She reached the door and stopped, her hand trembling as she pushed it open. The inside of the forge was a wreck. Tools scattered across the floor. The workbench overturned. And in the center of it all, Rowan sat on the ground, leaning against the anvil. Blood streaked his face. His shirt was torn, and there was a gash across his temple. But he was breathing. "Rowan," Alara whispered, rushing to his side. He opened his eyes, wincing. "You came back." "Of course I came back. You—" Her voice broke. "I thought you were—" "Not yet," Rowan said, his voice rough. "Takes more than 2 marshals to kill me." Alara looked around. "Where are they?" "Gone." Rowan coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "Creel's nose is broken. The other one took a hammer to the shoulder. They'll be back, but they needed to regroup first." "You're hurt." "I've had worse." Alara grabbed a cloth from the floor and pressed it to the gash on his temple. He hissed, but didn't pull away. "This is bad," she said. We need to leave. Now, before they come back with reinforcements. Agreed. Rowan pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Alara caught his arm and steadied him. Can you ride? She asked. I'll manage. They gathered what they could, supplies, the satchel of documents, Rowan's rifle. Within minutes, they were mounted on the bay mare, heading into the forest on a trail Alara didn't recognize. Rowan led the way, his movement stiff but steady. He didn't speak, and Alara didn't push. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, checking for pursuit. They rode for hours, the trail twisting through dense woods and rocky outcroppings. The sun was setting by the time Rowan finally pulled the horse to a stop near a shallow creek. We'll camp here tonight, he said, dismounting slowly. Alara slid down after him, her legs barely holding her weight. Are we safe? Safe enough, Rowan said. For now. He built a small fire, just enough to take the edge off the cold, and they ate in silence, dried meat and hard bread Rowan had bought that morning. It tasted like dust, but Alara forced it down. I'm sorry, she said finally. Rowan looked up. For what? For dragging you into this, for putting you in danger, for— Stop, Rowan said. I told you before. I made a choice. I don't regret it. You should, Alara said bitterly. You almost died today because of me. I almost died because Creel's a bastard, Rowan corrected. Not because of you. Alara shook her head, staring into the fire. This was a mistake. All of it. I should have just kept running, gone west, changed my name, disappeared. Instead I stayed, and now people are getting hurt. People were already getting hurt, Rowan said quietly. Long before you showed up. Your uncle's been destroying lives for years. You're just the first person who tried to stop him. And look where it got me. Rowan set his food aside and leaned forward, his gray eyes fixed on hers. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who didn't give up, someone who could have taken the easy way out and didn't. That's not weakness, Alara. That's strength. Alara's throat tightened. I don't feel strong. Nobody does, Rowan said. Not when they're in the middle of it, but you keep moving anyway. That's what matters. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to that thread of hope he was offering, but every step forward felt like it brought them closer to a cliff they couldn't see. What do we do now? She asked. We stick to the plan, Rowan said. We get to Ridgefield, we get the ledgers, and we bring this whole thing crashing down on Victor's head. And if we can't? Rowan's jaw tightened. Then we make sure he knows we tried. They reached Ridgefield 2 days later, exhausted and bruised. The town was bigger than Ashford Bend, with wider streets and taller buildings. There was a courthouse, a bank, a hotel with painted shutters. It looked civilized, respectable. Alara knew better. Where are the ledgers? Rowan asked as they dismounted near the edge of town. In a storage shed behind the old mill, Alara said. I worked there before I worked for Victor. The owner died last year and the place has been abandoned ever since. Nobody goes near it. Good, Rowan said. Let's move. They made their way through the back streets, avoiding the main roads. Alara kept her head down, her heart pounding every time they passed someone. But no one gave them a second glance, just another pair of travelers passing through. The mill loomed ahead, a massive structure of weathered wood and rusted iron. The water wheel had stopped turning years ago, and the windows were boarded up. It looked like a corpse. Alara led Rowan around to the back, where a small shed leaned against the mill's outer wall. The door was held shut with a chain and padlock. You have a key? Rowan asked. Alara shook her head. I hid it. Wait here. She knelt and ran her fingers along the base of the shed's foundation until she found a loose stone. She pried it free and pulled out a small iron key, covered in dirt and rust. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Thorough. I didn't have a choice. Alara unlocked the padlock and pushed the door open. The inside of the shed was dark and musty, filled with old crates and broken tools. She made her way to the back corner and pulled aside a rotting tarp. Underneath was a metal box, sealed with a second lock. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside were the ledgers. 3 of them, their leather covers stained and worn, and beneath them, a stack of letters, contracts, and deeds, all bearing Victor Halecrest's signature. This is it, Alara whispered. This is everything. Rowan stepped closer, looking over her shoulder. You're sure? I'm sure. She pulled out one of the ledgers and flipped it open. Page after page of transactions, names, dates, amounts. Every piece of land Victor had stolen, every bribe he'd paid, every life he'd destroyed, it was all here. "This'll bury him," Rowan said. Alara closed the ledger and looked up at him. "If we can get it in front of the right people." "We will." A voice spoke from the doorway. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." Alara's blood turned to ice. Victor Hailcrest stepped into the shed, flanked by Creel and the older marshal. Behind them were 3 more men, all armed, all watching with cold, predatory eyes. Victor was a tall man, well-dressed, with silver hair and a face that radiated authority. He looked at Alara the way someone might look at a stray dog, something to be pitied, then put down. "Hello, niece," he said smoothly. "You've been busy." Alara stood slowly, her hand moving toward the satchel. Rowan stepped in front of her, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his back. "Don't," Victor said. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and frankly, out of options." Rowan didn't move. "Seems to me you're the one out of options. Your whole operation's about to collapse." Victor smiled. "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, the only thing collapsing is this sad little rebellion you two have been trying to start." He gestured to the ledgers. "You think those mean anything? They're just paper, words. I have judges, marshals, politicians, people who matter. Who do you have?" "The truth," Alara said, her voice shaking but firm. Victor laughed. "The truth is whatever I say it is." He stepped closer, his expression hardening. "You were always naive, Alara. Always thought the world was fair, that justice actually existed, but it doesn't. Not for people like you." "Then I'll make it exist," Alara said. Victor's smile faded. "No, you won't." He nodded to Creel. "Take them." Creel drew his revolver, and the other men moved forward. Rowan pulled the rifle from his back, but before he could aim, one of the men slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Alara screamed and lunged for the ledgers, but Creel grabbed her by the arm and yanked her back. "Let her go!" Rowan shouted, struggling to his feet. Creel pressed the barrel of his gun against Alara's temple. "Move and she dies!" Rowan froze. Victor walked over to the metal box and picked up one of the ledgers, flipping through it casually. "You know, I really did try to help you, Alara. I gave you a job, a place to stay. I trusted you. And this is how you repay me?" "You're a thief," Alara spat. "A liar. You've destroyed people's lives." "I've done what was necessary," Victor said calmly. "This territory was chaos before I stepped in. I brought order, structure, and yes, some people got hurt along the way. But that's the cost of progress." "Progress?" Alara's voice shook with fury. "You stole land from families who had nothing. You forged documents, bribed officials, ruined lives, and you call that progress?" Victor closed the ledger and tossed it back into the box. "I call it survival. You should try it sometime." He nodded to Creel again. "Burn it. All of it." "No!" Alara struggled, but Creel's grip was iron. One of the men pulled out a match and struck it against the wall. The flame caught instantly, and he tossed it onto the pile of ledgers. Smoke billowed up, and the ledgers began to blacken and curl. "No!" Alara screamed. Rowan lunged forward, but 2 men grabbed him and slammed him against the wall. He fought, but there were too many of them. Victor watched the flames with a satisfied smile. "That's the problem with paper, Alara. It burns so easily." The fire spread quickly, consuming the ledgers, the contracts, the letters. Everything Alara had risked her life to protect was turning to ash. She sagged in Creel's grip, her vision blurring with tears. It was over. All of it. Everything she'd done. Everyone she'd dragged into this. It was all for nothing. Victor turned to Creel. "Take them back to Ashford Bend. Make a spectacle of it. I want the whole town to see what happens to people who cross me." Creel grinned. "With pleasure." Victor walked to the door, pausing to look back at Alara one last time. "You should have run when you had the chance." Then he was gone. They were dragged back to Ashford Bend in chains, riding in the back of a wagon like cattle. Alara sat with her hands bound, her mind numb. The ledgers were gone. The proof was gone. And now they were being paraded through the streets like criminals. The town gathered as the wagon rolled in. People lined the boardwalks, staring, whispering. Some looked curious, others looked afraid. None of them looked willing to help. Rowan sat beside her, his face bruised and bloodied, but his eyes still defiant. "Don't give up," he said quietly. "It's over," Alara said. "It's not over until we're dead," Rowan said. "And we're not dead yet." The wagon stopped in front of the saloon, which doubled as the town's courthouse. Victor stood on the steps, flanked by marshals and a man Alara didn't recognize, a judge, by the look of his black robes. Victor raised his hands, and the crowd quieted. "People of Ashford Bend," he began, his voice carrying across the street. "Today justice has been served. These two criminals, Alara Vance and Rowan Hale, have been apprehended for theft, fraud, and conspiracy against the territorial government." The crowd murmured. "They sought to undermine the very foundations of law and order," Victor continued, "to spread lies and sow discord. But their plan has failed, and now they will face the consequences of their actions." Creel yanked Alara out of the wagon, and she stumbled, barely catching herself. Rowan was pulled out next, and they were shoved toward the steps. Victor looked down at them with cold satisfaction. "Do you have anything to say for yourselves?" Alara opened her mouth, but no words came. What was there to say? The evidence was gone. The witnesses were too afraid to speak, and the crowd, her only hope, was silent. Rowan stepped forward. "Yeah, I've got something to say." Victor raised an eyebrow. "By all means." Rowan turned to face the crowd, his voice loud and clear. "You all know me. I've lived here for 3 years, fixed your tools, your wagon wheels, your plows. I've never asked for anything in return, never caused trouble. And now you're standing there, watching, while they drag me to the gallows for telling the truth." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "This man," Rowan said, pointing at Victor, "has been stealing from you, from all of you. He's taken land, forged documents, bribed officials, and he's done it right under your noses. But you didn't say anything, because you were scared, because it was easier to look away." "That's enough," Victor said sharply. "No," Rowan said, his voice rising. "It's not enough. Because if you let this happen, if you let him silence us, then you're next. All of you. He'll keep taking until there's nothing left." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victor's face darkened. "Remove him." Creel moved forward, but before he could grab Rowan, a voice called out from the crowd. "Wait." Everyone turned. Clara Finch stepped forward, her small frame trembling but her voice steady. "I want to say something." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Finch, this doesn't concern you." "It does," Clara said, "because he took my land too, just like he's taken from others." She looked at the crowd. "I've stayed silent for too long. We all have. But I'm done being silent." Another voice spoke up. "He took my farm." Alara's heart leaped. It was one of the men they'd visited, Garrett. "And mine," another voice said. One by one, people began to step forward. People Alara and Rowan had spoken to. People who had been too afraid to speak before. Victor's composure cracked. "This is absurd. These people are lying." "Are they?" Rowan said. He reached into his coat, slowly so no one would shoot, and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was one of the deeds Clara had given him, one he'd kept separate from the ledgers. "This is proof," Rowan said, holding it up. "And there's more where this came from. Letters, contracts, all showing what Victor Halecrest really is." The judge stepped forward, frowning. "Let me see that." Rowan handed it over. The judge read it, his expression growing darker with each line. Victor's hands clenched into fists. "This is a setup. These documents are forged." "Then let's find out," the judge said. He looked at the crowd. "I want everyone who has been affected by Victor Halecrest's dealings to come forward. Now." More people stepped out of the crowd, dozens of them. Victor's face went pale, and Alara realized for the first time that they might actually win. The street had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Victor stood on the steps, his face a mask of controlled fury, but Alara could see the crack forming in his composure, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darted from face to face in the crowd, calculating, searching for an angle. The judge, a man named Aldridge, lean and weathered with sharp eyes that missed nothing, held the deed up to the light, examining it closely. He'd arrived in town that morning on official business, pure chance, and now he stood at the center of something much bigger than a routine land dispute. "This signature," Aldridge said slowly, "is it yours, Mr. Hailcrest?" "Of course it is," Victor said, his voice smooth again, the politician's mask sliding back into place. "I've signed hundreds of documents, thousands. That's my job as land commissioner, but that doesn't prove— It proves you signed a transfer document that gave you ownership of land belonging to Clara Finch for a fraction of its value," Aldridge interrupted. "Without proper disclosure of terms." "She agreed to the terms," Victor said. "Did she?" Aldridge looked at Clara. "Mrs. Finch, did you understand what you were signing?" Clara's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "No, sir. He told me it was a loan agreement, said I could pay it back over time. I didn't know I was signing my land away." "That's a lie," Victor said sharply. "The document clearly states—" "The document is written in legal language most people can't understand," Rowan cut in. "That's the whole point. He buries the truth in words nobody can read and calls it legal." Murmurs rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. Victor's eyes locked onto Rowan, cold and venomous. "You're out of your depth, blacksmith. This is a matter of law, not— "Then let's talk law," Rowan said. He turned to the judge. "I've got more documents, not just from Mrs. Finch, from a dozen other families, all with the same pattern, same language, same signatures." He gestured to the crowd. "They're standing right here. Ask them." Aldridge looked at Victor, then at the crowd. "Is this true? Have any of you experienced similar circumstances with Mr. Hellcrest?" For a moment, nobody moved. The fear was still there, thick as fog. These were people who'd learned to keep their heads down, to swallow injustice because speaking up only made things worse. Then an old man stepped forward. His clothes were patched, his hands gnarled from years of farm work. "He took my land 3 years ago," he said, his voice gravelly. "Told me the railroad was coming through. Said I should sell before the value dropped. I trusted him. The railroad never came. And last I heard, he sold that same land for 10 times what he paid me." A woman spoke next. "He did the same to my husband. We lost everything. My husband drank himself to death over it." Another voice. "He forged my father's signature after he died. Took the land before we even knew what was happening." One by one they spoke. Voices that had been silent for years suddenly finding strength in numbers. The stories poured out, land stolen, families destroyed, lives ruined, and with each testimony Victor's face grew darker. Creel stepped forward, his hand on his gun. "This is mob rule, not justice. You can't— "Stand down, Marshal," Aldridge said sharply. "I want to hear this." Creel hesitated, glancing at Victor. Victor gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, and Creel stepped back, though his hand stayed on his weapon. Aldridge listened to each person, his expression growing grimmer. When the last voice faded, he turned back to Victor. "Mr. Hailcrest, these are serious allegations, fraud, forgery, abuse of office. If even half of what I'm hearing is true." "It's not," Victor said, his voice tight. "These people are confused, angry. They made poor decisions and now they're looking for someone to blame. I've done nothing illegal. Every transaction was conducted according to territorial law." "Then you won't mind if we examine the records," Aldridge said. Victor's jaw clenched. "The records are in my office in Ridgefield. I don't carry them with me." "Convenient," Rowan muttered. Victor's eyes flashed. "I don't answer to blacksmiths or fugitives, Judge. I answer to the territorial governor, and I assure you when he hears about this farce—" "The governor will hear everything I have to say," Aldridge said calmly, "along with a full report of these proceedings. But first I want to see proof. Real proof, not just testimony." Alara's heart sank. The ledgers were gone, burned to ash in that shed. All they had were the documents Rowan had kept, and those weren't enough to prove the full scope of Victor's operation. But then a voice called out from the back of the crowd. "I've got proof!" Everyone turned. A man pushed his way through, young, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and the wary look of someone who'd spent too much time around dangerous men. He wore a clerk's vest and carried a leather satchel. Victor's face went white. "Bennett!" The clerk, Bennett, stopped a few feet from the steps, his hand shaking slightly as he clutched the satchel. "I worked in Mr. Hailcrest's office for 2 years, kept his books, filed his documents." He swallowed hard. "I know what he's been doing, and I can prove it." You're fired, Victor said coldly. I quit this morning, Bennett shot back. Right after I copied these. He opened the satchel and pulled out a stack of papers. Ledgers, contracts, correspondence. Every fraudulent transaction, every bribe, every forged signature, it's all here. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, some angry, some triumphant. Victor stared at Bennett like he was looking at a ghost. You have no authority to remove those documents, Victor said, his voice shaking now. That's theft. Judge, I demand this man be arrested. I'll review the documents first, Aldridge said. He took the satchel from Bennett and began flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning quickly. Victor turned to Creel. Arrest him, now. Creel moved toward Bennett. Vamos, Bennett, but Rowan stepped between them. Touch him, and I'll break your arm. Creel's hand went to his gun. You threatening a federal officer? I'm protecting a witness, Rowan said. His voice was calm, but his stance was anything but. He was ready to fight, and everyone knew it. The older marshal, the one with the scar, put a hand on Creel's shoulder. Easy. Let the judge work. Creel glared at Rowan, but didn't move. Aldridge kept reading, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up at Victor, and there was no warmth in his eyes, only cold, hard judgment. Mr. Halecrest, he said quietly, you're under arrest. The words fell like a hammer. Victor's face twisted. On what charge? Fraud, bribery, forgery, abuse of office, take your pick. Aldridge closed the satchel and handed it to one of the townspeople for safekeeping. Marshal Creel, you will place Mr. Halecrest in custody. Creel didn't move. He looked at Victor, then at the judge, clearly torn. That's an order, Marshal, Aldridge said. Creel's jaw worked. Then he turned to Victor. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to... You work for me, Victor hissed. I own you, you understand? I own all of you. Not anymore, Aldridge said. Victor's composure finally shattered. He lunged for Bennett, but Rowan was faster. He grabbed Victor by the collar and slammed him back against the steps. Victor swung wildly, catching Rowan across the jaw, but Rowan didn't let go. He shoved Victor down, pinning him. It's over, Rowan said through gritted teeth. Victor stared up at him, breathing hard, his face red with fury and humiliation. You have no idea what you've done, no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Rowan said. A coward who hides behind badges and paperwork. Creel finally moved, pulling Victor to his feet and snapping iron cuffs around his wrists. Victor didn't resist, but his eyes burned with rage. This isn't finished, Victor said, looking at Alara. You hear me? This isn't finished. Yeah, it is, Alara said quietly. Creel led Victor away and the crowd erupted again, this time in cheers. People clapped, shouted, embraced each other. The relief was palpable, almost physical. But Alara didn't feel relief. She felt numb. Aldridge turned to her and Rowan. You two have a lot of questions to answer. I know, Alara said. But not today, Aldridge said. He glanced at the crowd, then back at them. Today, I think you've earned a moment's peace. Rowan nodded. Appreciate that, Judge. Aldridge walked away, calling for order, trying to wrangle the crowd into some semblance of calm. Alara stood there, her legs shaking, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Rowan touched her arm gently. You all right? She looked at him, this man who had risked everything for her, and she felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know. Come on, Rowan said. Let's get out of here. They walked back to the forge in silence, the noise of the town fading behind them. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. The air smelled like pine and smoke. When they reached the forge, Alara finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bench. Her whole body ached, her side throbbed, and the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her like a stone. Rowan lit the fire and put water on to boil. He moved slowly, carefully, like he was just as exhausted as she was. I can't believe it's over, Alara said. It's not over, Rowan said. Not completely. Victor still has friends, people who will want to protect him, and the legal process will take time. But he's in custody. The truth is out. For now, Rowan said. He poured hot water into 2 tin cups and handed her one. But don't underestimate him. Men like Victor don't go down easy. Alara wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Do you think the judge will follow through, or will he cave to pressure? Aldridge? Rowan considered. He strikes me as the stubborn type, but we'll see. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the water. Outside, the forge hammer lay silent for the first time in days. Thank you, Alara said finally. Rowan glanced at her. For what? For everything. For standing up when no one else would. For believing me. For... Her voice broke. For not turning your back. Rowan set his cup down and looked at her. Really looked at her. You did the hard part, Alara. You had the proof. You had the courage to go after him. All I did was hold the door open. You did more than that. Maybe, Rowan said. But I had my reasons. What reasons? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I told you I used to be a lawman. What I didn't tell you was why I stopped. Alara waited, sensing that this was something he didn't talk about often. I worked as a deputy in a town not unlike this one, Rowan said. Small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. There was a sheriff, good man, honest. He tried to do right by people, but there was also a businessman, wealthy, connected. He was running a protection racket, squeezing the townsfolk for money, burning down shops that didn't pay. Rowan's jaw tightened. The sheriff gathered evidence, built a case, was ready to arrest him. But the night before the trial, the businessman's men broke into the sheriff's house and killed him, made it look like a robbery. Alara's breath caught. I knew who did it, Rowan continued. Everyone knew, but the businessman had judges, marshals, politicians, all in his pocket. No one would touch him. And when I tried to pursue it on my own, I was told to let it go, that it was too dangerous, that I'd only get myself killed. He paused, staring into the fire. So I did. I let it go. And the sheriff's killer walked free. A year later, I left. Changed my name, started over. But I never forgot what it felt like to stand there and do nothing. Rowan, that's why I helped you, he said, looking at her. Because I wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen again. Not this time. Alara felt tears spill over, hot against her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. Don't be sorry, Rowan said. Be glad we stopped it here. They sat together as the fire crackled and the night deepened. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Alara felt something close to safe. The next morning, the town was buzzing. Word had spread fast. Victor Hailcrest, the untouchable land commissioner, was in chains. People who'd stayed silent for years were now talking openly, sharing stories, comparing notes. It was like a dam had broken. Aldridge set up a temporary office in the saloon and began taking formal statements. One by one, people came forward. Some brought documents. Others just brought their word. But it was enough. Alara spent the day helping organize the testimonies, cross-referencing them with the documents Bennett had provided. The scope of Victor's corruption was staggering. He'd stolen land worth tens of thousands of dollars. He'd bribed at least a dozen officials, and he'd forged signatures on documents that had destroyed entire families. By the end of the day, Aldridge had enough evidence to bury Victor 10 times over. But Victor wasn't going quietly. That evening, as Alara and Rowan were leaving the saloon, a rider came tearing into town. He was young, barely out of his teens, and his horse was lathered with sweat. Judge Aldridge, the rider shouted, sliding off his horse. Message from Ridgefield. Aldridge stepped out of the saloon. What is it? The rider handed him a sealed envelope. Aldridge tore it open and read quickly. His face darkened. What's wrong? Alara asked. Aldridge looked at her, then at Rowan. Victor's lawyers have filed an emergency appeal with the territorial governor. They're claiming I overstepped my authority, that the arrest was illegal. Alara's stomach dropped. Can they do that? They can try, Aldridge said grimly, and if the governor sides with them, Victor walks. That's insane, Rowan said. You have the evidence. You have witnesses. Evidence can be challenged. Witnesses can be intimidated, Aldridge said. And the governor owes Victor favors. A lot of them. Alara felt the world tilt. They'd been so close to winning, and now it was slipping away again. There has to be something we can do, she said desperately. Aldridge folded the letter and tucked it into his coat. There is. We go to the Capitol, present the case directly to the governor. Make him see the truth before Victor's lawyers can spin it. When? Rowan asked. Tomorrow morning, Aldridge said. I'll need you both to come with me, and anyone else willing to testify. Alara looked at Rowan. He nodded. We'll be ready, she said. They left at dawn. Aldridge, Alara, Rowan, Bennett, Clara Finch, and 5 others who'd agreed to testify. They traveled in 2 wagons, moving as fast as the horses could manage. The capital was 3 days away, but Aldridge pushed them hard, stopping only when the horses couldn't go any further. On the second night, they made camp near a river. Alara sat by the fire, exhausted, her mind racing. She kept thinking about Victor, about the lawyers, about all the ways this could still go wrong. Rowan sat down beside her, handing her a piece of dried meat. Eat. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. She took it, chewing mechanically. What if the governor doesn't listen? What if Victor's lawyers convince him we're lying? Then we make sure our story is louder than theirs, Rowan said. How? Rowan looked at the fire, his expression thoughtful. People don't just listen to facts. They listen to stories. And we've got a hell of a story to tell. Alara wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. That night she barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of fire and empty rooms and Victor's cold, triumphant smile. They reached the capital on the 3rd day, dusty and worn. The city was massive compared to Ashford Bend. Buildings of brick and stone, streets paved with cobblestones, people everywhere. It was overwhelming. Aldridge led them to the governor's mansion, a sprawling structure surrounded by iron gates. They were stopped at the entrance by guards, but Aldridge flashed his credentials, and they were let through. Inside, they were made to wait in a large hall with marble floors and high ceilings. Alara felt out of place in her worn dress, her hands still stained with soot from the forge. After what felt like hours, they were finally ushered into the governor's office. The governor was a broad man with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He sat behind a massive desk, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits. One of the lawyers was already talking. Governor, this is a clear case of judicial overreach. Judge Aldridge had no authority to I had every authority, Aldridge interrupted. Mr. Halecrest was engaged in systematic fraud. I acted within the scope of my office. Based on what? The lawyer shot back. Hearsay? The testimony of disgruntled settlers? Based on documented evidence, Aldridge said. He gestured to Bennett, who stepped forward and placed the satchel on the desk. The governor opened it and began flipping through the papers. His expression was unreadable. Victor's lawyer leaned forward. Those documents were illegally obtained. They should be inadmissible. They were copied by a clerk who witnessed criminal activity, Aldridge countered. That makes him a whistleblower, not a thief. The governor looked up. Is Mr. Halecrest here? He's being held in Ridgefield pending trial, Aldridge said. Bring him, the governor said. A guard left the room. Minutes later, Victor was led in, still in chains but dressed in a clean suit. He looked composed, confident, like a man who knew the game and how to play it. Governor, Victor said smoothly, thank you for seeing reason. I haven't seen anything yet, the governor said. He looked at Alara. And who are you? Alara stepped forward, her heart pounding. My name is Alara Vance. I'm Victor Halecrest's niece, and I'm the one who exposed him. The governor's eyebrows rose. You worked for him. I did. I kept his books, filed his paperwork, and when I realized what he was doing, I gathered proof and tried to report it. He had me framed for murder to silence me. Victor's lawyer scoffed. This is absurd. The woman is a fugitive, a criminal. Her testimony is worthless. Then let's hear from the others, the governor said. He gestured to Clara, to the farmers, to Bennett. I want to hear what they have to say. One by one they spoke. They told their stories, land stolen, lives ruined, families destroyed. They showed the documents, the forged signatures, the fraudulent contracts. And slowly, the governor's expression began to change. When the last person finished, the room was silent. The governor looked at Victor. Do you have anything to say? Victor's mask finally cracked. They're lying, all of them. This is a conspiracy to destroy me. A conspiracy involving dozens of people? The governor said. People who have nothing to gain and everything to lose. They're being manipulated, Victor insisted. By who? the governor asked. A blacksmith and a fugitive? Victor didn't answer. The governor closed the satchel and stood. Mr. Hailcrest, based on the evidence presented here today, I'm upholding Judge Aldridge's arrest. You will stand trial for fraud, bribery, and abuse of office. And if you're found guilty, you will face the full consequences of the law. Victor's face went pale. Governor, you can't. I can, and I will, the governor said. Take him away. Guards moved forward, and Victor was led out, his protests fading down the hall. The governor looked at Alara. As for you, Miss Vance, the charges against you are hereby dropped, pending a full investigation, but based on what I've heard today, I believe you were acting in the public interest. Alara felt her knees buckle. Rowan caught her, steadying her. Thank you, she whispered. The governor nodded. Justice isn't always fast, but it does come. Eventually. They stayed in the capital for 2 more days while the legal proceedings were finalized. Victor was formally charged and held without bail. His assets were frozen, and the investigation into his network of corruption was just beginning. On the 3rd day, Aldridge told them they were free to go home. As they rode back toward Ashford Bend, Alara felt lighter than she had in months. The fear was still there. Old habits died hard, but it was fading. Rowan rode beside her, silent as always, but there was a peace in his expression she hadn't seen before. What are you going to do now? She asked. He glanced at her. Go back to the forge, fix things, live. Just like that? Just like that? Alara smiled. Sounds boring. Good, Rowan said. I could use a little boring. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. And when Ashford Bend finally came into view, small and crooked and home, Alara realized something. She wasn't running anymore. She was free. The town looked different when they rode back in. Or maybe it was Alara who had changed. The buildings were the same, crooked, tired, leaning into each other like old men. The mud was still thick in the streets. The smell of horses and wet wood still hung in the air. But something fundamental had shifted. People looked at her now, not with suspicion or fear, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. She wasn't sure she deserved either, but she felt the weight of it all the same. Rowan guided the mare through the main street, and people stopped what they were doing to watch. A few nodded. One man tipped his hat. Clara Finch, who'd ridden back with them, waved from her wagon before heading south toward her shack. They reached the forge just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Rowan dismounted and helped Alara down. Her legs were stiff from days in the saddle, and she had to lean against the horse for a moment before she could stand on her own. You need rest, Rowan said. I need a lot of things, Alara said. Rest is somewhere down the list. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. He led the horse to the small stable behind the forge and began unsaddling her. Alara watched him work, his movements efficient and familiar. He belonged here, she realized. In this place, with these tools, doing this work, it suited him in a way that wearing a badge probably never had. What's at the top of the list? Rowan asked without looking up. What? You said rest was down the list. What's at the top? Alara thought about it. Answers, I guess. About what happens next. Where I go from here. Rowan finished with the saddle and turned to face her. You could stay. The words hung between them, simple and complicated all at once. Stay here? Alara asked. Why not? The charges are dropped. You're not running anymore. And this town could use someone who knows how to read contracts and spot fraud. He paused. People trust you now. That's worth something. They trust you, Alara corrected. I'm just the woman you lied about marrying. About that, Rowan said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the blank marriage certificate, the one he'd shown her that first night. It was folded and worn, the edges frayed. We could make it real, if you wanted. Alara stared at him. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm saying the option's there, Rowan said. No pressure, no expectations. But if you're looking for a reason to stay, that's one. A legal one, anyway. Alara didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Probably, Rowan agreed, but it's honest. She looked at him. This man who'd stepped between her and death without hesitation, who'd fought marshals and corruption and his own buried past to help her. And she realized that somewhere along the way, between the lies and the fear and the blood, she'd started to care about him. Not because he saved her, but because of who he was when no one was watching. Quiet, stubborn, decent in a world that punished decency. "I'll think about it," she said softly. Rowan nodded, slipping the certificate back into his pocket. "Fair enough." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Rowan went back to his work at the forge, and Alara found herself helping in small ways, organizing his tools, keeping the books, managing orders. It felt strange at first, this quiet domestic routine after weeks of running and fighting. But strange didn't mean bad. People came by the forge more often now, not just for repairs, but to talk, to thank them, to share news about Victor's trial, which was set to begin in 3 weeks. The territorial governor had appointed a special prosecutor, and word was that Victor's network of corruption was unraveling faster than anyone expected. Judges were stepping down. Marshals were being investigated. The whole rotten structure was collapsing. Creel was one of the first to fall. Turned out he'd been taking bribes from Victor for years, and when the evidence came out, he was stripped of his badge and arrested. The older marshal, the one with the scar, took over as acting federal marshal for the region. He wasn't warm, but he was fair, and that was enough. One afternoon, a week after they'd returned, Bennett showed up at the forge. He looked nervous, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to jump out at him. "Mr. Hale," he said. "Miss Vance, can I talk to you?" Rowan set down his hammer. "What's on your mind?" Bennett shifted his weight. "I wanted to thank you, both of you. What you did, standing up to Victor, getting people to speak out, it gave me the courage to do the same. I've spent 2 years keeping my head down, telling myself it wasn't my problem, but it was, and I should have done something sooner." "You did something when it mattered," Alara said. "That's what counts." Bennett nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "I also wanted to ask, what happens to people like me? People who worked for Victor, even if we didn't know the full extent of what he was doing." "You mean, are you going to be held accountable?" Rowan asked. "Yeah." Rowan leaned against the anvil, considering. "That's up to the prosecutor. But from what I've seen, they're going after the people who knew and participated willingly. If you cooperated, if you helped bring him down, that'll count for something." "And if it doesn't?" Bennett asked quietly. "Then you deal with it," Rowan said. "You own what you did, learn from it, and do better next time. That's all any of us can do." Bennett looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." After he left, Alara turned to Rowan. "You think he'll be all right?" "I think he's asking the right questions," Rowan said. "That's a start." 2 weeks later, Alara received a letter. It was delivered by a writer from the capital, sealed with an official stamp. Her hand shook as she opened it. It was from the territorial governor's office, a formal acknowledgement of her role in exposing Victor Halecrest's crimes, along with a commendation for her courage and integrity. At the bottom was a note in the governor's own handwriting. "The territory owes you a debt. If there's anything I can do to assist your future endeavors, do not hesitate to ask." Alara read it twice, then set it down on the workbench. She didn't know what to feel. Relief, maybe. Vindication. But also a strange kind of emptiness, like she'd been carrying a weight for so long that she didn't know how to walk without it. Rowan came over and read the letter over her shoulder. "That's something." "Is it?" Alara asked. "A letter doesn't undo what happened, doesn't bring back the years I lost, doesn't fix the families Victor destroyed." "No," Rowan agreed. "But it's acknowledgement. It's the territory saying you were right, that what you did mattered. Don't underestimate that." Alara folded the letter carefully. "I just wish it had happened sooner, before so many people got hurt." "It never happens as soon as it should," Rowan said. "But it happened, and that's because you didn't give up." She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something close to pride. Victor's trial began on a cold morning in late autumn. Alara and Rowan traveled back to the capital to testify, along with Clara, Bennett, and a dozen others. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, lawyers, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see the fall of Victor Halecrest. Victor sat at the defense table, flanked by his lawyers, looking thinner than Alara remembered. The confidence was gone, replaced by something harder to read. Anger, maybe. Or resignation. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, documents, testimonies, financial records. One by one, the witnesses took the stand and told their stories. Clara spoke about losing her land. Bennett detailed the fraudulent transactions. Alara testified about the ledgers, the forgeries, the systematic corruption. Victor's lawyers tried to fight back, tried to discredit the witnesses, tried to argue that the documents were taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming, and when the jury returned after only 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Victor to 15 years in prison, along with fines and restitution to the families he'd defrauded. It wasn't enough. Nothing could undo the damage he'd done, but it was something. As the guards led Victor out of the courtroom, he looked directly at Alara. There was no apology in his eyes, no remorse, just cold, bitter hatred. Alara met his gaze and didn't look away, and then he was gone. They stayed in the capital for a few more days to tie up loose ends. The governor met with Alara personally, offering her a position in the Territorial Land Office, a chance to help reform the system from the inside, to make sure what Victor did could never happen again. It was a good offer, an important one. But as Alara sat in the governor's office, listening to him talk about reform and oversight and accountability, she realized something. She didn't want to spend her life buried in paperwork and bureaucracy. She'd had enough of offices and ledgers and the slow grind of institutions. What she wanted was something simpler, something real. "I appreciate the offer, Governor," she said, "but I'm going to decline." The governor looked surprised. "May I ask why?" "Because I've spent too much of my life doing what other people expected of me," Alara said. "Working for my uncle, keeping his books, playing the role of the obedient niece, and it almost destroyed me. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not running or fighting or trying to meet someone else's expectations." The governor nodded slowly. "I understand, but if you change your mind, I know where to find you," Alara said. They rode back to Ashford Bend one last time. The weather had turned colder, and the first hints of winter were creeping into the air. Frost clung to the grass in the mornings, and the trees were shedding their leaves in slow surrender. When they reached the forge, Alara dismounted and stood there for a moment, looking at the simple structure that had become a kind of refuge. "So," Rowan said, swinging down from his horse. "What now?" Alara turned to face him. "I've been thinking about your offer." "The marriage thing?" "Yeah." Rowan waited, his expression carefully neutral. "I don't want to marry you because it's convenient," Alara said, "or because I need protection or a place to stay. If we do this, I want it to be real. I want it to mean something." "Agreed," Rowan said. "And I need time," Alara continued. "Time to figure out who I am outside of all this. Time to heal. Time to just be." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe a few months. Maybe longer." Rowan nodded. "I can wait." Alara smiled. "You're sure? I'm kind of a mess." "So am I," Rowan said. "Seems like a good match." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. It felt good. "All right," she said. "Then let's see where this goes." Winter came to Ashford Bend slowly, wrapping the town in snow and silence. Alara stayed at the forge, and bit by bit, she started to rebuild. Not her old life. That was gone, and she didn't want it back. But something new, something hers. She started helping people in town with their paperwork, reading contracts, explaining legal language, making sure no one else got cheated the way Clara and the others had. It wasn't official work, and she didn't charge much, but word spread. People trusted her. And slowly, she began to trust herself again. Rowan kept working at the forge, but he started taking on apprentices, young men from town who needed a trade, who needed someone to teach them something useful. He was good at it, patient in a way that surprised Alara. Watching him guide a nervous kid through shaping a piece of iron, she saw a side of him she hadn't expected, a gentleness beneath the rough exterior. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings at the forge, afternoons helping people in town, evenings by the fire, talking or not talking, just existing in the same space. It was quiet, simple, and after everything they'd been through, quiet felt like a gift. One evening, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Alara looked across at Rowan and realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long, the constant waiting for the other shoe to drop, The certainty that safety was an illusion, it was gone. Not completely, maybe. Fear like that didn't disappear overnight, but it had loosened its grip. "Rowan," she said. He looked up from the blade he was sharpening. "Yeah? I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "To make it real." Rowan set the blade down carefully. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He stood and crossed the room, pulling the worn marriage certificate from his pocket. It was more battered than ever, the creases deep, the edges frayed. But it was still there. "We'll need a witness," Rowan said. "We'll get one tomorrow," Alara said. "Right now, I just need to know. Do you want this? Really want it?" Rowan looked at her, and in his gray eyes she saw the same thing she'd seen that first day in the store. Resolve, certainty, the willingness to stand when everyone else was sitting down. "Yeah," he said. "I do." "Then let's do it right," Alara said. "No more lies, no more pretending, just us." "Just us," Rowan agreed. They were married the next week in a small ceremony at the saloon. Judge Aldridge came back to town specifically to officiate, and half the town showed up to witness it. Clara Finch cried. Bennett gave an awkward speech about courage and second chances. Even the new marshal attended, standing at the back with his arms crossed but a faint smile on his scarred face. It wasn't fancy. There were no flowers, no music, no elaborate decorations, just two people standing in front of their community, promising to face whatever came next together. When Aldridge asked if anyone objected, the room stayed silent. And when he pronounced them husband and wife, the town erupted in cheers. Alara kissed Rowan, her husband now, for real, and felt something settle deep inside her. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness felt too fragile, too fleeting. This was something sturdier, contentment, maybe, or peace. Later, as they walked back to the forge under a sky full of stars, Rowan took her hand. "You think we'll be all right?" he asked. "I think we've survived worse," Alara said. "Fair point." They walked in silence for a while, the snow crunching under their boots. "Rowan," Alara said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you regret it, any of it? Stepping in that day at the store fighting Victor, all of it?" Rowan thought about it. "No. I spent 3 years hiding, pretending the past didn't matter, but it did. It always does. And stepping forward, standing up when it mattered, that's the first time in a long time I felt like myself. Even though it was dangerous?" "Especially because it was dangerous," Rowan said. "Safety's a lie we tell ourselves. Real living happens when you stop hiding and start choosing." Alara squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you chose me. I'm glad you let me." Spring came eventually, the way it always does. The snow melted, the trees budded, and Ashford Bend, crooked, tired, stubborn Ashford Bend, kept on living. Victor Halecrest's trial became something of a legend in the territory. People talked about it in saloons and general stores, about how a fugitive and a blacksmith had brought down one of the most powerful men in the region. Some of the details got exaggerated over time. Rowan became a legendary gunfighter in some versions, Alara a brilliant lawyer in others. But the core of the story stayed the same. Sometimes courage doesn't look like a hero on a white horse. Sometimes it looks like a scared woman stumbling into a store begging for help. Sometimes it looks like a quiet man stepping forward when everyone else stays silent. And sometimes justice doesn't come from the law or the courts or the people in power. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people refusing to look away. Alara learned that the hard way. She'd spent years keeping her head down, following orders, trusting the system to work. And when it failed, when it turned against her, she could have given up, could have run and never looked back. But she didn't, and neither did Rowan. They'd built something together in the space between fear and courage. Not a perfect life. Perfect was a fairy tale, and they both knew better. But a real one, messy and complicated and worth fighting for. One evening, months after the wedding, Alara stood outside the forge and looked at the town. People moved through the streets, going about their lives. Clara Finch walked past with a basket of laundry. Bennett rode by on a horse, tipping his hat. The new marshal stood outside his office, talking to a group of settlers. It was ordinary, unremarkable. And it was enough. Rowan came up behind her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange it is," Alara said, "that everything can change and stay the same at the same time. Yeah, Rowan said, that's life. Is it a good life? Rowan looked at her, then at the town, then back at her. I think so. We're still here. Still standing. That counts for something. Alara leaned into him. It counts for everything. Years later, when people asked Alara Hale about those days, about Victor and the trial and the fight that nearly killed her, she always told them the same thing. She didn't win because she was brave. She won because she was too stubborn to quit, and because when it mattered, one person chose to stand beside her instead of looking away. That's all it took. One person, one moment, one choice. And from that single choice, everything changed. Victor Hale Cress died in prison 7 years into his sentence. Heart failure, the official report said. No one from Ashford Bend attended the funeral. Creel disappeared after his arrest. Some said he fled west. Others said he drank himself to death. Alara didn't care which. Clara Finch never got her land back, but the territorial government gave her a settlement that let her buy a small house in town. She lived there until she was 92, telling anyone who'd listen about the day a blacksmith and a fugitive saved the town. Bennett became a lawyer, specializing in land rights and fraud cases. He never married, never got rich, but he helped a lot of people who couldn't help themselves. Judge Aldridge retired after 20 more years on the bench. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by law books and a lifetime of trying to do right. And Rowan and Alara Hale stayed in Ashford Bend. They raised 2 children, a daughter who became a school teacher and a son who took over the forge. They grew old together, arguing and laughing and building a life that no one could take from them. When Rowan died at 73, his hands were still scarred from the forge. And when Alara followed him 5 years later, she was buried beside him under a simple stone that read, "She chose to speak." Because that's what it came down to, in the end. In a world that rewards silence, speaking up is an act of rebellion. And rebellion, real rebellion, doesn't always look like violence or revolution. Sometimes it looks like a woman refusing to run, a man refusing to hide, a community refusing to look away. Sometimes it's just one person saying, "This is wrong, and I won't pretend it isn't." And sometimes, if you're lucky, that's enough to change everything. The gunshot that shattered the calm of Ashford Bend that day wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. And what came after, the fear, the fight, the refusal to surrender, that became the story people told for generations. Not because it was easy, not because it was clean or simple or tied up with a bow, but because it was true. And truth, in the end, is the only thing that lasts.